atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my colleague on the left, Professor of Law at Chase Law School, Ken Katkin.
Hey, Michael, it's fun to be doing a show with you.
Yeah, I always enjoy doing that. It was kind of weird on the weekend show. I felt not exactly like a third wheel, but like I was, horning in on sort of the Trey and Ken thing. But it was great to hear. It was great to be part of that and hear Trey. As many listeners know, he has been on a medical odyssey over the last few years, and I got to say the grace and courage and just the way he has handled it, I think is really reflective of the sort of person that Trey is. He is a great guy, and I am just so happy that he's looks like he's maybe on the mend.
Yeah, he didn't make it all the way through to this bonus show today, but he did make it. He did make it through the main show, and I hope he is on the way to the mend.
Absolutely. So one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about on the main show, there was so much news, is one story that in other weeks would have been probably a huge story was the Netanyahu visit. This was on Wednesday, the 24th. Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu gave I think it was not quite an hour-long address to a joint meeting of Congress. He called for the U.S. to stand with Israel. He promised total victory against Hamas, characterized U.S. protesters of Israel's war as Iran's useful idiots. And that occasioned plenty of applause from Republican lawmakers in attendance, some notable silence from some Democrats. There were even a number of Democrats who boycotted the speech. And one, Representative Rashida Tlaib, who's the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, at one point held up a sign on one side read, war criminal, on the other side, guilty of genocide. So not difficult to understand where she is on this issue. And Netanyahu did address those sort of claims from the progressive left. He said, the outrageous slanders that paint Israel as racist and genocidal are meant to delegitimize Israel, to demonize the Jewish state, and to demonize Jews everywhere. And, while the relationship between Presidents Netanyahu and Biden has been, I guess it's fair to call it strained at times, Netanyahu did thank Biden for what he called his tireless efforts on behalf of the hostages, as well as a half a century of friendship to Israel. Now, Biden has at times called Israel's actions in Gaza as over the top in his terminology. He's also said that he's not sure if Israel has committed war crimes or not. And he's also suggested that, maybe Netanyahu is kind of dragging out the war for his own political survival. Now, normally when I hear talk about Israel on the Politics Guys, it's a Trey and Ken show. So it's a little bit new ground for me. Ken, you're one of my go-to Israel guys on this show. So what did you think, I guess, about, first we'll talk about his speech and then maybe the reactions to that speech and the kind of the broader thing. So what's your take on his speech?
Yeah, well, first I'll say you're just as qualified as Trey for today's discussion because it's really about U.S. domestic politics, right? It's not really about Israel at all. It's about what Netanyahu was doing here in the United States. And I think what Netanyahu was doing here in the United States was trying to help Trump. I think that was the main purpose of his visit. It really wasn't about anything that's going to affect Israel. In fact, if anything, the short-term impact of his visit could only be negative for Israel because antagonizing the administration of the sitting president of the United States is not a great strategy if you're trying to actually get the United States to support you. But I think he's playing a long game with American domestic politics here and thinking if he can play a role in helping Trump get the White House back, it's worth, whatever short-term antagonism to the present administration, whatever harm that might cause. And I think Netanyahu does know that, in a certain sense, he's got Biden over a barrel because even though Biden, I think, would very much like to see the ceasefire that the U.S. has been trying to organize, that other Arab countries and European countries have been working on, and that in principle, even the Israeli military supports at this point, the U.S. doesn't have a lot of effective tools to force that on Netanyahu because the U.S. security interests in the region as a whole don't primarily revolve around Gaza. They primarily revolve around Iran and Hezbollah and the balance of power between our allies in the Gulf states and Iran. And U.S. security interests would be so severely threatened by an all-out war in the north of Israel between Israel and Lebanon, which would really be a war between Israel and Iran, that U.S. is going to have to support Israel on that. And there's really very little way for the U.S. militarily to support Israel in that kind of conflict without giving Israel enough military support that they can also use it in Gaza.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all that. It's frustrating, and maybe this is why I didn't go into international politics and foreign policy, because it's almost always choosing between bad and worse alternatives, right? No one is rarely entirely pure in these things. And so while there's a lot that Israel does, especially in this government, that I just have huge problems with, I have that's not a word. I have much bigger problems with Iran than I do with Israel, as bad as some of the stuff I think Israel is doing. So I think you're right. There's a reason why, for instance, that in the post-World War II era, Israel is by far the largest recipient of U.S. aid, and it's not even close. I mean, like Egypt is not even, I think, half or barely around half of what Israel is. And that's because our interests oftentimes diverge from what I think we would like to see when it comes to humanitarian things and how our allies treat people. That stinks. But I think, really just are, like you said, over a barrel on this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, not only does the American public more or less support a ceasefire, and certainly the Democrats in America mostly do, but the Israeli public supports a ceasefire. But Netanyahu benefits personally from, just keeping this war going because it's basically the only thing that keeps him in office. And Trump benefits from it. And if Trump benefits because it's divisive within the Democrats here. And I think that to Netanyahu, those are much more important goals than doing the right thing, bringing peace, doing what America would like him to do, doing what the Israeli people would like him to do, doing what the Israeli military would like him to do, because they're much more worried too. The Israeli military wants to really conserve and marshal all the military resources for defending the north against increasingly vigorous attacks from Hezbollah across the Lebanese border. And they don't want to be tied down in Gaza, which is a conflict that could be over.
I guess I certainly, respect the right of protesters to put up whatever signs and say whatever they want. Well, pretty much whatever they want. But I guess it's more problematic to me when you have a sitting member in Congress, talking about genocide and holding up signs and so forth. And I guess when I go back to Netanyahu's useful idiots thing, and I think, well, what exactly is Representative Tlaib trying to accomplish? It seems like she's a smart person. She's got to know that this only hurts her party. And so this sort of performative politics by members of Congress that is only going to hurt them, I find it really kind of troubling. And I'm wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree that there's a genocide going on. I think that the actually, the only party to the Gaza conflict that has genocide in its platform is Hamas. And it's a literally genocidal platform that the whole from the river to the sea concept is about getting every Jew out of that region, not necessarily through murder, but either through murder or deportation. And I think that's closer to genocide. I don't think the Israelis have had any agenda of expelling Palestinians from the region. And in fact, they had fully withdrawn from Gaza, but before the October 7th attacks and left Gaza, pretty much, certainly contained, but not there were no physical attacks against it. So I think it's an unfair charge. I don't know if I thought it was a fair charge. I don't know how I would think about Congress members holding up signs. I think Congress members, they are there to be political. They are there to represent their constituents. So I guess I don't have a problem in principle with the fact that a Congress member was holding up a sign like that while Netanyahu was speaking. I do think that the actual content of the sign was not fair and was incorrect.
I guess maybe this is sort of I don't know. I've said, on policy, I definitely am left of center, but I sort of have the soul of kind of a Burkean conservative, if you will, which is sometimes a weird mix. Yeah. And on that, so to me, there's a certain decorum. And ever since that whole "you lie" thing during the Obama speech, I forget the member of Congress, was it Joe Wilson or someone? So anyway, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And ever since then, it just feels like whatever whether it's on the left or on the right, it just really bothers me when Nancy Mace at a hearing is telling the secretary or the director of Secret Service that they're full of shit. I don't know. That, to me, I hold members of Congress to a higher standard. And when I see them being vulgar and performative to appeal to what feels like sort of the lowest common denominator, I feel like something's lost there.
Well, I think I agree with you to a point. I guess I usually look at this through the lens of kind of First Amendment free speech principles because I am a con law professor. And I think the yelling out does cross a line. I completely agree with you on that. But to me, holding a sign is different because I guess what offends me about the yelling out is not just the breach of decorum, but the fact that it's actually an attempt to, at least for a moment, to silence the speaker. The speaker has the platform. The person in the audience doesn't have the platform, and the speaker's being talked over. I don't see the same thing happening with a sign. I think holding up a sign doesn't in any way silence the speaker. The speaker still has the platform. They can speak and they can be heard.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. On the whole issue of the ceasefire, now President Biden said he's going to be working really hard on that in his remaining time in office. My sense of things is that if there's going to be a ceasefire, it will be in the next administration, whether that's a Harris or more likely. I think there'd be more likely to be a ceasefire if Donald Trump ends up being president. I'm wondering, you've followed the Israel issue more closely than I have. What do you think about that?
I think actually the bigger factor about whether there's going to be a ceasefire is whether Netanyahu's coalition in Israel falls apart over not doing the ceasefire. Israeli public opinion is extremely on the side of the ceasefire, and the imperative to get back living hostages in Israel is far, far, far more popular than the imperative to just keep fighting in Gaza. So I think Netanyahu's, as long as he's in control, he's not going to do a ceasefire. I think his coalition could fall apart over this, and that would cause one. I don't agree, though, that it would be more likely under Trump. I think, if anything, Trump is sort of characterologically more willing to support continued conflict, as long as all the U.S.'s role would be supplying arms and intelligence and not sending American soldiers over. And I think that would be fine with Netanyahu. So I don't see that Trump has the desire to bring about a ceasefire that I think Biden at least has the desire.
Yeah. Well, I think at least listening to Donald Trump, he will within, 24 hours bring peace to Ukraine and the Middle East and apparently make the world a far better place, right? The secret plan to end the war, not just one, but two. Very, very impressive. So, yeah.
Well, I believe him on Ukraine because, his plan to bring peace is just simply to surrender Ukraine to the Russians. And if there's no U.S. or not enough Western support propping up Ukraine, then that war will end. But I don't think he's got the same kind of ability to do anything like that in Israel because, he's not going to cut off aid to Netanyahu. Netanyahu's his buddy. And, he's got no other mechanism to bring about any ceasefire there.
Yeah. So do you think that Netanyahu's claim or statement that Israel will not quit until they've achieved total victory, basically wiped out Hamas as an active, working, viable organization, is that just rhetoric, or do you think that there's actually a way that you see that it's, even if unlikely, that it's possible that Israel's able to do that?
No, I think it's just rhetoric. I think, if there was not the simultaneous conflict on the northern border, which there is, then I think if Israel could deploy all of its military resources to actually occupying and reoccupying Gaza, so that as the Israeli military achieves successes in Gaza, they consolidate those battlefield successes with occupation, that would be a path to actually defeating Hamas. But that can't happen because geopolitically, Israel can't completely reoccupy Gaza, without seriously upsetting the rest of the Arab world. And also, just from a resource standpoint, Israel can't reoccupy Gaza because Israel doesn't have the personnel to do it, because they need to actually keep their personnel, have attention focused on the northern border as well. So I think there's no military way to do it. There's no geopolitical way to do it. There's no such thing as defeating Hamas without a complete military reoccupation of Gaza, not just battlefield wins. And in the battlefield, there's been many instances already where Israel has kind of destroyed areas of Gaza, gotten Hamas out of there, and then not occupied it, and then Hamas has just come back. And I don't see how there's really any other alternative to that.
We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys, or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,